Hi there, in my last upload I covered can you change your personality? This time I want to cover can you change your intelligence? So in this video we're going to break down what exactly is intelligence, is it the same as IQ, how it differs from intellect, and the kinds of things that you can do to either boost your intelligence or at least prevent it from worsening. So we're going to start with the definitions of intelligence and intellect and kind of break down the difference between them and an explanation of exactly what each one is. So intelligence at the fundamental level is essentially just the ability to learn, reason and solve problems. So in effect, when you look at these things broadly, what it really comes down to is speed of operation for each of these three things. So if you take something cliched like a maths problem, what really distinguishes the highly intelligent person from the person who isn't is the speed at which they can solve that problem. A lot of people mistakenly think intelligence as the sheer capacity to solve something. So an intelligent person will be able to solve something, whereas a non-intelligent person won't. But this doesn't seem to be true in practice, because if you put someone in front of something long enough and give them an adequate amount of time to digest and figure things out, they will often come to the conclusion just a little bit more slowly than the other person. So if that is a broad definition of intelligence, then what exactly is intellect? Well, intellect is more of a personality trait than some kind of quantitative measure of performance. The way I like to distinguish the two is, while intelligence is the ability to solve problems, intellect is your appetite for learning and abstract thinking. So someone who's intellectual tends to have a real hunger for information and then using that information to come to conclusions and essentially understand how the world works at an abstract level. I've often seen people assume that intelligence and intellect are the same thing, but if you want ample proof that they are not, then look at the ways that the two are measured. If you watch my last video, you'll know that the last of the personality traits from the big five is openness, and intellect is in effect a sub-branch of that trait openness. So when you combine intellect with the other notable sub-branch of openness, which is aesthetic sensitivity, then the two kind of combine to form the wider and more broad trait openness. So the only real way to figure out your levels of intellect is to take a scientifically and psychologically verified personality test, but even this will not be 100% accurate. I find you can usually gauge someone's approximate level of intellect by the way that they speak and their interest in deep and philosophical ideas. If you want to figure out your levels of intelligence, then the only real way of doing so is to take an official IQ test. IQ, or intelligence quotient, is a standardized test used to measure your ability to perform certain types of tasks. While IQ tests specifically vary from place to place and test to test, in general they measure certain traits such as pattern recognition, memory, and reasoning. The goal of IQ tests is to measure your intelligence relative to everyone else, and the data collectively is normalized so that the average IQ result is 100. So if your IQ falls between, say, 90 and 110, then you are within the range of average intelligence. So I think an important point to note is that you shouldn't try to associate your IQ with your identity. It's not reflective of who you are as a person, but rather it's a reflection of your ability to solve these types of tasks. Many situations around the world and many jobs and occupations don't actually require high IQ, so it's important not to associate high IQ with higher sense of worth or value. Having said that, I don't think there's anything wrong with striving for more intelligence or doing things and forming habits that are conducive of higher performance so that you have the tools and the skills to get more out of life. So these are the 6 things that you can do that will improve, or at the very least prevent or slow the decline of your intelligence. Let's start with the obvious, and number 1 is education. Education is useful for a variety of reasons, including providing you with the framework to, in adult life, accumulate more knowledge and give you the tools to be able to figure out and solve problems. Education also provides you with knowledge along the way, which you can then take into your adulthood and connect the dots between certain things you already know, rather than having to learn them from scratch. One of the interesting things about intelligence is it's actually been increasing over the past few generations. But again, if we remember with IQ, it's normalized so that 100 is average. But if you compare someone with, say, 120 IQ now versus 120 IQ from 50 or 100 years ago, the person of today would actually be more intelligent than back then. A big reason for this, I think, is the increase in education. More and more people across the world are getting educated, which is allowing them to think more critically about the world and solve more problems. The next important trait in this list is bravery. In my opinion, fear is one of the biggest obstacles, not only in learning, but also in getting towards the kind of destinations that you want to get to in order to be able to achieve your goals. Fear dissuades you from doing the uncomfortable but necessary things that are required for you to live a meaningful life. As I've said before, and this is kind of a paraphrasing of something I've come across previously, but courage is not the absence of fear, it's merely the willingness to act despite it. So being brave in the face of uncertainty and embracing a certain level of discomfort will in the long run reward you in ways you can't currently foresee. Number 3 is read widely. The thing about reading is it not only increases your intelligence, but it also increases your intellect, because once you start getting an appetite for knowledge and new ideas, these new ideas will kind of grow and increase your appetite and hunger for new and future ones. These new ideas not only allow you to connect the dots between previously accumulated ideas, but it also, on a physiological level, allows for neurons or neurological connections to strengthen, which effectively increases your intelligence. The thing about reading is what's important is you just develop the appetite for reading. And I've always thought of reading as in the same way that you would go to the gym, a kind of a muscle. So there's a reading muscle that at the start won't be very strong or very stimulated, but as you build an appetite and a desire for reading, this will increase and strengthen, and your capacity to read more, not only in quantity, but also in depth and complexity, will grow and increase. So number 4 is get enough sleep. I know on the one hand you're probably sick of hearing the importance of sleep, but on the other hand, I don't think you can understate the relevance of sleep, particularly when it comes to learning and development. A lack of sleep is counterproductive to almost everything you could possibly care about, including losing weight, reducing stress, retaining information, and overall health. Also, another thing to point out is the phrase get enough sleep isn't actually referring to quantity, although that is important up to a point, but really what it comes down to is quality. What I'm referring to specifically is giving yourself the opportunity to go into the deeper stages or deeper cycles in sleep. Number 5 is a healthy diet. And this is something that I'm not an expert in myself, but there's certain kind of core principles that I think apply across the board. On a specific level, I don't think what works for one person will necessarily work for another, but like I said, if you follow some core set of guidelines or ideas, then this should put you in a better place. I think sometimes we take our brains for granted and we don't actually realize or remember that it's ultimately just made of cells and tissue, and these cells and tissues and neurons and connections require certain nutrients in order to develop, grow, and thrive. So ultimately what's important is that you're getting the kinds of nutrients that are needed in order to allow you and your brain to perform at its best. Doing this and avoiding the kinds of foods that cause inflammation are key to living a healthy life, but also increasing your intelligence. The 6th and final one is exercise. I don't think you could understate the importance and relevance of exercise when it comes to your lifespan, your health span, your performance, and your intelligence. Doing exercise promotes blood flow, but also the second circulatory system, which is the lymphatic system, only operates and works properly when there is movement. This lymphatic system is closely related to immunity, and to use a real-world example, this is essentially your waste disposal system. So if you can't clear the waste, if you can't reduce your stress, then it's almost impossible to create an environment to learn. It's been shown that high levels of stress and low levels of sleep, which are actually related, makes learning or even performing properly impossible or extremely difficult. Not only is exercise one of the biggest factors when it comes to longevity, but it's so important as well because it affects so many other things. So for example, if you do a lot of exercise on a particular day, or at least an adequate amount of exercise, then this will kind of lower your stress levels, which will also make sleeping easier, and then that sleep will allow you to perform better the next day. So the last thing I want to cover is whether intelligence naturally declines over time, naturally increases, or does it remain the same? So in order to be able to understand this, we need to be able to distinguish between the two types of recognized intelligence, which are fluid and crystallized. Fluid intelligence is the ability to acquire more knowledge and to solve problems more rapidly, whereas crystallized intelligence is the ability to use the knowledge and skills that you've acquired over time to solve different types of problems. What's interesting is fluid intelligence peaks in your late 20s and then declines thereafter, but by following the steps that I've just covered, you can actually slow this down. Crystallized intelligence, on the other hand, can actually peak as late as your 60s. So when you actually combine the two types of intelligence together, you can actually get kind of an averaging out effect where your intelligence kind of maintains or even potentially increases if you have good habits and healthy kinds of behaviors. I'm going to leave it there for this one. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, feel free to leave a comment or subscribe. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one.